Also, has anybody tried, does the YouTube link work? Did anybody like actually click on it? I tried to embed it and it didn't work, and then I got very angry in my office and was yelling, and my assistant was like, "What are you doing? My stupid YouTube thing wasn't working." Okay, so this is sarcomere length tension. Please remember that there will be questions about this at or on the test. Sarcomere length tension. In everyday practice, okay, your sarcomeres very, 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 very rarely ever get outside of this range right here. They very rarely get outside of that kind of optimal middle range. When you move, you do not stretch your sarcomeres very much. You do not shorten them a huge, huge amount. Okay? This is good because this means they're going to stay at roughly their optimal length most of the time. That way, there's an optimal amount of actin and myosin overlap, and at the sarcomere level, you can get roughly as much force as you're ever going to be able to get out of that sarcomere. That's good, okay? Yet, what we just showed, though, is what I like to call the in vivo length tension relationship. In vivo means intact, whole animal, whole muscle, okay? Just think, in a person, we're having what we call length tension. The other way to talk about this, though, really should be, this is a force production against joint angle fracture, okay? Force production against joint angle. Who's had 5 minutes? No couple of you guys. Okay. What's torque? Anybody remember from biomechanics what torque is? Make Christina proud. Come on. Nobody remembers torque?
Yep. The force around the axis.
Force around the axis. Good. You've all been on like a seesaw at some point in your life, right? Remember levers and these kinds of things? Every joint that you have is a lever. Okay? And so torque is an angular barrier. Force production from the sarcomere is a linear barrier. And so you get torque by taking the force produced in the sarcomere here, which is usually measured in newtons, and multiply it by the moment arm, which is basically the distance from the insertion of the tendon to the axis of rotation in the joint. Okay? So you multiply those two things together and you get torque. Okay? Torque is the application of force around a joint. So when you lift weights, it's Monday, right? International Chest Day. Whatever the bros are benching today, that's a torque. Right? You say, I can bench 350 pounds. Okay? That's how much torque they can generate. It's not actually how much force they can generate. It's torque. Okay? When you run and you move and you propel your body forward, you're generating torque in your quads and your glutes and your plantar flexors and your dorsiflex. Okay? So all of the things that we think of as force or strength, it's actually torque. Okay? Now you may be thinking, well, Dr. Black, that's fine. Why should I give a shit? Why do I care? Why are you making a big deal about this and making me do squats first thing in the morning on a Monday? One, I'm kind of a glutton for punishment. But two is the moment arm in your joints changes as you move through a range of motion. And that is why you are stronger and weaker at various points in a range of motion around a different joint. Okay, the sarcomeres generate the same force. That does not change, or rarely changes. Okay, the sarcomeres in my bicep can generate just as much force here when I'm at full elbow extension as they do when I'm at full elbow flexion, and every place in the middle. But as I move like this, as you do knee extension, go in and out, the distance from where the tendon inserts and the axis of rotation changes. And so it looks something like this, okay? This is what we're seeing right here. The top is showing sarcomere length, okay? This is showing what they're calling the effective moment arm, and then this is torque. So this graph is if you take this one and that one and multiply them together, okay? But this is what's going on from a torque standpoint. This is at the knee, okay, right here. And so what you can see is that right at very sort of flexed joint angles and at very extended joint angles, the moment arm is smaller. And then in the middle, the moment arm is bigger. And so it's the kind of interaction of what we see from a sarcomere standpoint and what we're going to see from the joint moment arm standpoint that give us our effective force. Okay? So that's how we change these. We're changing the moment arm or the lever arm. That's why generally at very extended and at very flexed joint angles, you are weaker than where you are in the middle. Okay? You're weaker than where you are in the middle. Now, every one of you is anatomically a little bit different. And so some of you have different lengths of moment arms, okay? And your moment arm length will change ever so slightly different as you move through a range of motion. And so this is also one of those things about why my muscles are just as big, or maybe they're bigger than this other person, and yet they're stronger. I train just as much as they do. I'm just as good at motor unit recruitment and maximizing firing rate as they are, and yet they're stronger. Because anatomically, their moment arms are different, or anatomically, the way their moment arm shifts is going to be different. Does that make sense, guys? Okay. When you go and lift weights, again, we'll use our Monday, our bros that are going to bench today example. Okay. When you are lifting free weights, you are only as strong, but only lift up to the weakest point in a range of motion, right? I can only squat whatever I can get up from way down here, okay? If I'm doing this, I can do way more than if I can come down here. So in the application of things, you're only as strong, basically, as your weakest point in a range of motion. So you're basically only as strong as your smallest moment on them. Okay. Does that make sense? Okay. And that's why it's hard. When you go way down when you do a squat, why it's harder to get up than if you only go a little less. That's why when you do curls, you get all the way out to here, you're always going to fail at this point rather than just trying to come in that top half of the thing. Okay. Okay. Last couple of pieces here. I know there's a lot of stuff that goes into this. Okay. Brought weights. I should have gotten up earlier. Ellis just ruins all of this. That's okay. I need a picture of her. Okay. The last part of this, okay, is you've got muscle size, you've got muscle architecture, you've got how much of the muscle can you turn on, you've got what is the moment arm and where are you in the joint. Now, the last thing we also have to consider, though, is what about contraction velocity or contraction speed? Okay. If I ask you to go really fast, okay, you're going to generate less force than if I tell you that you can go a little bit slower, right? So what we would normally do is we would have, right, I'd have a dumbbell, we'd give you a lightweight and say, go fast, 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 and then we'd give you a really heavy weight and say, go as fast as you can, and it barely sort of creeps up, okay? So here is sort of an example of what we call the force velocity relationship. And I want this, I cannot emphasize this enough. This is for a concentric muscle contraction. And so these are data that were published in 1950, one of the first times this was ever observed. I'm going to show you guys some more. We're going to flip the axes around, but the relationship is the same. Here's force production on the x-axis. So on the right side, high force level. On the left side, no force. And then here's velocity on the y. So basically no velocity. Okay. The muscle is not moving. So this would be an isometric contraction. Versus very, very fast as we move our way up. Okay. And so as you see this relationship, it's basically inverse. The faster you go, the less force you generate. Okay. Faster you go, the less force you're going to get. Because of this, isometric contractions, you should be able to hold in a place more weight and generate more force in an isometric contraction than you could ever actually move. Okay? Unrack the thing in the squat and just stand there. Just stand. Okay? Part of that's about the joint angles and you're kind of doing things, but if you go down just a little bit, you can hold more than you could go down and bring back up. Okay? Why does this happen? Everything comes back to cross bridges. Okay? When you want to go really fast, you have to run the cross bridge cycle faster and faster and faster and faster and faster, which means you have to break actin and myosin apart many times. Okay? So if we look at an instant in time and you're trying to go fast, you have lots of cross bridges that have detached themselves so that they can sort of go back to their high energy conformation and quickly do a power stroke again. But at any moment in time, the faster you're going, there are fewer cross bridges formed. Because there's fewer, there's less force. Okay? Because there's fewer, there's less force. So that is why when you go fast, you get less. It's also why when you go fast, that it costs you way more energy. Okay? If I told you your body weight is the same, you got to run fast, you got to run slow. Running faster is going to cost you more energy. And again, it's going to kind of be like this. Okay? You guys understand? Anybody, I think of it in this way. Anybody ever participate in like a tug of war? Okay? So imagine you're doing tug of war, right? Everybody's holding on to the rope, and it's exactly equal with the other team. Okay? In order to pull them backwards, you can't move. All you can do is let go with your hands. Okay? So in order to pull and keep it moving, I have to let go with at least one hand. When I let go, we have less force being applied than what the other side is doing. So to go fast, I got to go like this. Everybody else does as well. So at any moment in time, there may be a lot of us that have a hand or both hands that are not holding on to the rope. Okay? Which means if they're all holding and there's some weight on the other side, I got to have way more people over here if I'm going fast in order to get enough force and have enough cross bridges to make it go. Okay? That's the general idea of what's happening when we're sort of breaking this cross. Okay? Does that make sense? I hope so. Okay. This will be on the test. Okay. I promise you this will be on the test. Promise you, being able to draw this, understand it, explain what's going on will be on the test. Just like with the moment arm, just like with sarcomere length tension. Okay. Now, I'm going to show you guys a little bit of a different graph. Okay. To try to explain what happens when you do an eccentric contraction. Okay. So what you see here, guys, the graph has been flipped around. Okay. We have force or torque, because this was done in the quadriceps. Here is torque on the y-axis, and then there's this weird thing going on the x-axis. Velocity is here on the x, okay? But I want you guys to start right here in the middle, where velocity is 0. This line in the middle is 0 velocity. This is an isometric contraction, okay? So think it's quad, it's just kick against something as hard as you can, no movement, right? That gets me X amount of force. On the right side of 0, as the numbers in velocity go positive, that's just the direction. So going to the right over here is knee extension. So this is a concentric contraction. Okay. Here's isometric force. As I go faster, concentrically, force is going to fall. It looks just like the previous slide. We just flipped the axis around it. The idea is the same. Okay. The faster I go, the less force I get. All right. But look what happens on the left side of this graph. It says velocity is negative. That means that we're just going in the opposite direction. We're going faster and faster doing extension rather than flexion. So this is an eccentric contraction, right? Somebody tell me, what the hell does that look like? That's weird. It doesn't look the same, does it? So what is happening as I go faster and faster eccentrically? What happens to force production? It goes up, then what does it do? And it levels up. Okay. So with an eccentric contraction, going faster initially gets us even more force, but then I go faster and faster and I don't lose any force. Okay. So the eccentric portion of the force velocity curve, force is in essence independent of velocity. You can go fast eccentrically and you don't lose any force. Okay. Again, though, this comes back to the answer to why, comes back to the cross bridge side. It comes back to do an eccentric, I engage the cross bridges and they hold on. That's it. They don't have to break. And because they don't break, I can maintain that force production. Okay. That at least should give me the same force as what I get isometrically, right? Engage a certain amount of cross bridges, you get a certain amount of force. Everybody stand up again. We're gonna do another fun thing. Okay. In order to understand how do I get more force, here's what I want. Rock the first thing. Okay. Everybody get where you can move around. The person that jumps the highest, I will give a bonus point to on the test. I'm kidding. But what I want is everybody try to jump as high as you can. Right now, everybody jump. What did you do before you jumped? Okay? Bend down. Why? It gives me some spring back, that's right. Okay? Why does it give you spring? Okay, I'm doing this, right? What kind of contraction are my quads with? They're lengthening, right? Eccentric. Why is that helpful? It's eccentric to start, but then it's concentric when I go. Where's that spring coming from? What? Does it have to do with energy potential? Where are you storing potential energy? As I stretch like this, where am I storing potential energy? In my legs. Where in my legs? What particular structure? Or structures? Do you have rubber bands in your body? Yeah, maybe. What are they called? Okay. I'm really okay. What stretches? As you go down, as you do things, what is stretching? You guys said, what part of the muscle will stretch? The fibers, again, we're getting close, right? Rubber bands are made out of what? Elastic, right? So the extra stuff comes from them being elastic, right? You stretch them and they want to go back to their original thing. You have structures in your muscles, you have things connected to your muscles and your bones that are also elastic. I think somebody over here said it. Elastin is the thing that might be in there. They're mostly made out of collagen. Tendons, right? Ligaments. As I go down, you stretch the connective tissue, right? The connective tissue eventually becomes the tendon. It stretches, it stores energy, and then when you do a concentric contraction, it shortens, it releases that energy, right? It's like stretching the rubber band, and you let go of it, goes that way. That's why, right? It's called a stretch shortening cycle. Stretch, store extra potential energy that I can get force from. Then when I go ahead and jump, I get force from the fibers, but also extra force from the elasticity in mostly the tendons. Okay? That's what's happening eccentrically. As you lower something down, right, there's stretchiness in the connective tissue in the muscle, there's stretchiness in the tendon. That's going to work against gravity to try to not let your arm go down. As I sink like this, same thing here, it's trying to not let me sink towards the ground. So I'm getting extra force from the storage of elastic energy. Okay? That's why eccentrically you get more force. You can lower down way more weight than you can ever hope to pick up. Okay? Okay, you guys can say. I mean, the answer was literally on the screen, guys. Okay, so the last piece of this that I want to go over is the application in some ways of all of this together. It's a parameter called power. Okay, power. If you want to run fast and jump high, you need to be able to generate large amounts of muscular power. Okay, so power is the product of force and velocity. So you multiply the two things together. Okay? So you can remember, though, that there is this relationship between force and velocity. That when I want high force, I can't go very fast. Or if I want to go very fast, I don't get a lot of force. So power is maximized kind of somewhere in the middle. Okay? Typically at about 2/3 of maximal force and about 1/3 of maximal velocity. It's going to vary from person to person. But that's where we're going to come from. Okay. So your ability to generate as much force as possible, as fast as possible, is the thing that allows you to generate acceleration and overcome gravity and run or jump, right? Very high, very fast. Okay. So one of the things to appreciate about this is that individual fiber types have their own power curves. Okay. And so if you see here, type 1 fibers, right, like this, type 2A, up here, don't worry about the difference in the lines before and after tapering. That's just a sort of training application. I just want you guys to see how much more power you can get out of type 2 fibers than you can out of type 1. Okay. This comes from the difference in the myosin ATPase. Right? You can break the myosin and actin apart from each other much faster and get more force in your type 2 fibers. This is why sprinters and jumpers are mostly genetically determined. They're mostly born. Okay? I can make every one of you a better distance runner. Every single one of you. I can make all of you a little bit faster by changing your running form and things, but you either have fast twitch fibers or you don't. There's not a whole lot that we can train around those guys. Okay? That's how this is going to be. Okay. Questions about that? Guys think you can speak with some level of authority a week from now on all the things that contribute to force production? Size, architecture, improvement, firing rate, joint angle and moment on, and the cost. Those are kind of the 5 or 6 kind of big things. Okay. Every time you move, every time you do a contraction, no matter what it is, all of those things are working together in concert to let you get whatever amount of force or whatever movement you're doing. So all overlaid on top of each other. All. Okay. Okay. Now, we're going to do a quick little tour here with what's left of our time today through something called sensory motor integration. Okay? Sensory motor integration. Everybody, get close to your neighbor. Put your finger like right here, right on the side of their head. Okay? Not on yourself, on your neighbor. Okay? Or like, okay? Do it, okay? Do you sense that the person is right there putting their finger next to you? Okay, now put your hand away, okay? Sensory. You see things, you feel things, right? Hopefully nobody touched each other. Now, lightly get close and clap and see what they do. Any of you feel the urge to want to move after all of that, right? They're like, oh, I'm gonna pull away. Okay? Part of that is this sort of in-brain kind of thing. Okay? All right, we'll wait another. I got more things that we're gonna do. But what we're gonna try to go through here is your body, right, has this ability to sense quote unquote things. Okay. Light, temperature, touch, position in space, okay, and the chemical environment within a particular limb or body part. And that information that you sense is going to be sent from the muscle, from your skin, from your eyes. It's sort of sends out in the periphery and it gets sent back up into your brain. That's called afferent, an afferent signal. Okay, afferent signal. So it travels back up to the brain. The brain then decides from all of that what's going on, right? Oh, it's getting hot. Oh, it's getting cold. Or, okay, he's leaning forward like this and putting his foot up, right? And these sorts of things. We're changing our sense of position. So we sense things, it gets sent to the brain, and then the brain will, if it needs to potentially, send signals down to that body part, to that limb, to those muscles, to that particular body segment, and it may change your position. It may make a muscle contract. It may move you away or towards something. Okay? This is the idea of what we call sensory motor integration. Okay? So if I stand like this, and I lean forward, right, and you were to come up here and try to push me around a little bit, I'm going to automatically start moving arms and doing things, right? I am sensing my position, and I'm making these small motor adjustments in order to continue doing what I'm going to do. Okay? Same thing. You touch something hot, you pull your hands away. That's probably more of a reflex, but that is part of sensory motor integration. Okay. So I want you guys to know sort of just some very, very basic parts of the brain. Okay. Yes, you'll learn all the different parts of the brain. I'm sure you did it in anatomy, but maybe in general psych or something as well, and those things. So what I want you guys to know is, right, the cerebrum, which we're going to have conscious and be awareness of stimuli, and it's going to control sort of movement in a lot of ways. Okay, the diencephalon, that's where the thalamus and the hypothalamus are. The thalamus really plays a big role in integrating sensory information. And then the hypothalamus, right, in terms of what the HPA axis is all about maintaining homeostasis. Okay. You've got the cerebellum, which is going to help us with motor control. Okay. And then we're going to have sort of areas down in the brainstem, which is going to be where the autonomic nervous system is going to be. Sympathetic, parasympathetic, things that control respiration, cardiovascular responses. And then there's some other areas that we won't get into that are going to control your sense of pain and your ability to modulate pain. They're going to come out of the brainstem. And I only put that on there because pain is an afferent signal. And it's a thing that we know can have some effects on motor control. Okay. So within all of this, all right, frontal lobe here in purple. Okay, frontal lobe. Right? That's where the primary motor cortex is going to be. That's where your primary kind of intellect and things that we think of kind of conscious control and those things are going to be there. The temporal lobe, just here in blue, kind of more on the side, okay, is where you're going to get auditory information. The parietal lobe, which is the green kind of back up here on the top, is where a lot of sensory input is going to come in. It's going to get routed through there and the thalamus. And then in the very back here, the occipital lobe, that's going to be where we're going to get visual information that's going to come in. I'm not going to ask you guys too much more about understanding the regions of the brain beyond all of this. Okay. But I do want to mention, right, because I'm sure it's very obvious, is that all of these things work together. Right? You may get a signal that comes in a certain place. And it's not just it goes to this one particular place and then that's it. It's going to go. And then let's just say the occipital lobe will then have connections, right, to the temporal lobe, to the frontal lobe, to the brainstem, like all over the place. It's all of this kind of interconnectedness that's going to drive our responses. It's going to drive our perception of the world around us. Okay. Okay. So I mentioned afferent signaling. I mentioned we're going to call that kind of the sensory division, okay? But brain and the spinal cord are called the central nervous system. And then things sort of downstream of that, distal to like the motor neurons, are considered the peripheral nervous system. Okay? You've got 12 cranial nerves. You don't have to know all of them. We've got 31 spinal nerves that are going to connect in. Right, but we mostly have what we're going to break the peripheral system into a sensory side and a motor side. The sensory side gathers information from around you, okay, from our environment, from things happening to us on our skin, in our fingers, our toes, wherever, our sense of position, and it brings that information back through the peripheral nervous system into the central. That's afferent signaling. The motor division is from central out. Okay, you've talked a lot about that already. Motor recruitment, that's an efferent signal that's coming from the motor division. Additionally, the autonomic nervous system is considered to be kind of part of this motor division, part of this peripheral nervous system. Okay, autonomic things control involuntary functions. Okay, regulating heart rate, regulating body temperature, breathing rates, things of that nature. Okay. The somatic system is mostly the motor system. Since you have some kind of voluntary motor control, you get to make a choice about what's going on. Okay. So let's talk about sensory input just a little bit. Okay, just a little bit. You're going to have input from a whole bunch of different places. Okay, you're going to get input from your internal organs, from connective tissue, a lot from blood vessels, which may seem a little bit weird. Okay, a huge amount from skin, and then a bunch from muscles. Okay? You get all of this information, you're monitoring what's happening, you're monitoring the internal and external environment around those things constantly. Okay? Within this, okay, you're going to have receptors for different kinds of input. And those receptors are going to be in these very broad types of categories. You have a thing called a mechanoreceptor. Okay? Mechanoreceptors sense touch, pressure, stretch. Okay? Everybody take your finger and just tap yourself on the nose. You feel that? Okay? Pressure, touch. There are mechanoreceptors in the skin, both on your finger and on your nose in those areas, that are going to sense the fact that you're changing the pressure in those areas. And that's how we sense touch. Okay? Light touching pressure, harder touching pressure. Okay? All we're doing is activating more or less these mechanoreceptors. We have stretch receptors. You know where your bicep is or my arm is in space based upon how stretched or not stretched, right, that muscle is or those tendons are. That is also a mechanical signal. It's sensing where we are in space. Okay? We have thermoreceptors that sense hot and cold. Okay. Got your big water bottle, and hopefully it's still pretty cold. If you're just like my wife, so keep things cold, like ice won't melt for like 2 days. In there, like you can touch it and grab it and be like, "Ooh, that's cold." Okay? Or you can touch that and it's cold, and you can touch yourself on the neck and feel like that feels warmer. There are thermoreceptors, specific ones for hot and cold. You have photoreceptors that sense light. Okay? How people look, what anything looks like is just your eyes sensing light and the differences in these things, and then our brain forming these maps out of all of that. It's why. Okay? You have what are called chemoreceptors, which are really, really important. Not so much for what we're going to talk about today, but especially for metabolism and controlling metabolic rate. You have what are called chemoreceptors. They sense changes in the chemical environment inside of the cell. Okay? They're very highly attuned to levels of potassium, to hydrogen ions or pH. They're really sensitive to changes in the acidity in a particular cell. We have things that sense lactate, which is going to be related to the hydrogen ions, things that sense ADP and ATP. Okay? You have chemoreceptors for just about everything. And then you also have what are called nociceptors, which are going to be things that are going to be perceived as painful. Now, the interesting thing is that within the nociceptors, you have mechanical nociceptors, thermal nociceptors, chemical nociceptors, photosensitive nociceptors. And so the kind of range on all of these things between I'm just perceiving it versus I perceive it and it hurts or it doesn't hurt can also kind of be. Okay. So what we're going to want to look at though is how do we take these signals that we're getting and make choices about how we're going to contract our muscles, how we're going to adjust force, how we're going to move based upon those. So I want to bring up a couple of muscle-specific receptors. Okay. The first of them is called a muscle spindle. The second one is the Golgi tendon organ. Then you're going to have some additional receptors that are called kinesthetic receptors. And then you have other things in your muscles that are called free nerve endings. And we'll get into each one of these. Okay. Why is it important that muscles and joints be able to respond to sensory input? Well, we need to adjust force production to prevent injuries, right? You need to know I'm trying to do a bicep curl, whether or not that's actually happening. How much force do I have? What's my joint angle? Is it moving the way that I want it to move? Am I doing what I need to be able to do? Ooh, I see a car coming. I got to process car here, move out of the way, right? I'm learning how to ride a bike, all of these different sorts of things. So we need ways to perceive our environment and then very quickly make the appropriate adjustment in force production. Okay? And that's why we have all of these different kinds of receptors. So we're going to start off by talking about muscle spindles. Muscle spindles are specialized muscle fibers. In every muscle, you have in with your regular normal fibers, you have little bundles of these special ones that we call intrafusal fibers. They're these small kind of mini fibers, and what their job is to be a mechanical sensor for the length of the muscle. Okay, the length of the muscle. It's going to vary based upon how big the muscle is, on how many of these things you have, but they're all going to be in there. Muscle spindles are unique. Okay, they're unique. They can sense length, but then they also have motor innervation, which means that the spindle can change its length as well. The spindle itself can also contract or relax. Okay? And so they look kind of like this. You've got your muscle fibers that are going to be in there, and then you've got a collection of these sensory neurons and things that are going to wrap their way around them. And what they're going to sense is as the fiber, the spindle itself changes length, then the cells within it and those fibers within them are going to change their shape. The fluid in their cytoplasm is going to get squished around, and that's going to stimulate these nerves that are going around. Okay? That is going to elicit a very, very distinct response. Okay. So when you stretch a muscle, stretch, okay, stretch. I hate stretching. Stretch it down. Says the guy that can't touch his toes. Okay. You stretch, you activate the muscle spindle because you're lengthening that muscle. It is then going to send that signal to the spinal cord. One, it then goes up to the brain and says, hey, that muscle is lengthening. But then it also activates a reflex loop. Now, a reflex is something that happens where you can get a signal from the periphery to a motor neuron, and then the motor neuron will either fire or not fire, and it doesn't have to go up to the motor cortex. Okay? It's a faster kind of automatic way of doing things. So when you stretch a muscle, those spindles will send input to what we call the homonymous motor neuron. What that means is it innervates and signals to the motor neurons in the muscle where the spindle exists. So I stretch my bicep, spindles in my bicep will then send signals through afferent nerves to the motor neurons of my bicep. Okay. What this does, the general reflex loop with the spindle, is to increase contraction force. You're lifting something, you're trying to go, and it starts going back down. It then says, okay, motor neuron to that muscle, we need more force. Fire, don't let it stretch. The idea is if we overstretch the muscle, it's going to get injured, it's going to get damaged. So don't, right? We need more force because we're stretching, so fire better. It also then inhibits the antagonist muscle. So when you stretch your bicep, it causes your tricep to relax. Okay. Causes your tricep to relax. You guys ever heard of PNF stretching? Proprioceptive neuromuscular facilitation. You sort of have a person contract in one way and then you stretch them going the opposite direction. That's exactly what we're doing. Is you basically stretch, make one thing relax, and then stretch the muscle to just relax. Okay. Then all of this happens, we get a signal, an efferent signal back to the spindle, and the spindle itself will change its length. And as it changes its length, then its sensitivity to further stretch can be either made greater or less. Okay. So that's why it's got both sensory and motor function. This allows us to correct for errors or make sort of these snap judgments about, do we need more force? Do we need less force? What's happening? What's the length in all of my muscles? How does that change? Okay. You can trick your muscle spindles. Anybody ever been on a vibration plate? You get on a vibration plate and you trick your muscle spindles. Vibrate, you vibrate, you vibrate. And you get a lot of this antagonist sort of relaxation and things. You want to be much, much more flexible. Vibrate the muscle, and then here you go. All right. So we can trick these things, we can train these things, but they're generally there to keep you in some ways from overstretching a muscle. related to the spindle, but it senses something different. It's called something called the Golgi tendon. The Golgi tendon senses force. Okay, force. Golgi tendons are not in the muscle themselves per se, they're actually in the tendon. So here's your tendon, here's all the collagen fibers in the tendon. We're going to have these Golgi tendon nerves that are going to get woven in between all of the individual collagen fibers. So when you generate lots of force, that tendon will stretch ever so slightly. As it begins to stretch, it squishes those nerves. Okay? It squishes those nerves. As they get squished, then it turns on the Golgi tendon. Okay? So the Golgi tendon organ also has a connection to the homonymous motor neuron. So it will signal, say, bicep Golgi tendon organ will signal directly to the bicep alpha motor neuron. It will also signal to tricep. So when you stretch, you get more force. The opposite happens with the muscle spin or with the Golgi tendon. When you get lots of force, it attempts to protect the muscle and the tendon by shutting the force off. When you activate the Golgi tendon, it inhibits the homonymous motor neuron and it excites the antagonist. So if I generate lots of bicep force and I activate the Golgi tendon, it will make my bicep shut off. It will turn my tricep on. So I will try to put down that weight, put down that box or whatever I'm doing. Okay? So sort of two sides of the same thing. Don't overstretch and cause damage, right? But also don't generate so much force. It's going to be in some ways above and beyond what our tendons and ligaments and muscles and bones can actually deal with. Okay. You hear the stories, right? Car fell on somebody and the person runs over and yanks the car up off of them and they could never do it otherwise. Probably one of the things that we're doing then is in those kinds of emergency situations is that you basically just completely inhibit your Golgi tendon organ. You can just get more force after all of that. Although you lift the car off and then they don't tell you that those people like ripped all their muscles in half and a bunch of things, but the person was there, so it's good. Okay, but that's what goes along with this. All right. Questions about that? You need to know, what do they sense, force or length, and then what is the thing that they turn on? Do they turn on the agonist muscle or the antagonist muscle? Which one gets turned on and which one gets turned off? Okay. So I mentioned the idea of a reflex. Okay. How many of you guys have ever seen a reflex measure? Okay. Some of you guys in the back probably can't see. But if I do what's called the tendon tap reflex, I promise you I'm not making this up. Okay. I tap the tendon and then I get a knee extension. What's happening is I tap the tendon pulls on the muscle, and so the muscle lengthens a little bit. As it lengthens, the muscle spindle gets activated, and it says, hey, make that muscle short, get force to that muscle. And I kick. Okay? So the tendon tap reflex is a way to measure if your muscle spindles work. Okay? There are some of you that do not have good spindle function. We can diagnose it in that way. Okay? There are some of you that may have deals where the problem is either peripheral, where the spindles don't work, or it may be that connection and stuff that's going on at the level of the alpha motor neuron is working. People will check those things by doing all of that. That's going to use the spindle. Okay? There's a thing called the flexor withdrawal, which is going to be you touch something hot, you step on something sharp, and what happens is you're going to get flexor withdrawal. So you're going to withdraw from the stimulus, touch something hot, activate the flexor. So my bicep, pull your hand away. Step on something, activate hamstring. Pull your foot away. Okay? That's the flexor withdrawal we're going to be able to see. We actually do a thing in the lab where we will shock your foot until it hurts. And then we measure activity in your hamstring, and we can figure out at what point have we begun to activate the flexor withdrawal reflex. And that tells us something about how sensitive to pain you are, and whatnot by doing this. You can do it in any, you can put the EMG on any flexor muscle. So we can put it on your bicep, and we can shock down on your hand a little bit. We can see things, and you can't trick us that way when we do those things. But that's what's going to happen. Another reflex is called the crossed extensor reflex. So basically, as I lean forward, right, as one side of the body flexes, the other side extends to try to balance yourself out. This is stuff that you don't have to think about. You just move, and it just sort of happens, right? Your posture is going to shift automatically. All right, so this is going to be some other things about this idea of how do we integrate all of this information together, okay? Most of it happens in the higher brain centers. You've got your primary motor cortex where you're going to decide what movement to make. You've got the premotor cortex, which is going to kind of be the place where the original idea is going to come from. And this is where all of your learned skills are going to be. Learn how to ride a bike, learn how to throw a javelin, or whatever it's going to be, kick a ball in a certain way, swing a golf club, okay? Those are motor patterns that you have done before and you remember them. And those are going to be stored in the premotor cortex, and so that you're going to get the primary motor cortex to do things. You have then basal ganglia, which are part of the cerebral white matter, and that's going to initiate these sort of sustained repetitive movements. If you have damage in your basal ganglia, you cannot make them pop. And then there's the cerebellum, right, which is going to coordinate tiny, smooths out muscle contractions so that things look not kind of herky-jerky. And then that's going to be where you compare what you wanted to do to what you actually did, and then try to make adjustments based upon sort of what you were perceiving or how you would do it. Okay? You ever done something, right? Like you shot a basketball, or you did something, you're like, ooh, that didn't feel quite right, and you did it the way that I wanted to. Or you watch somebody else do something, it's not the same when you have a little kid. She watches everybody and she does it, and she tries to mimic you, do those exact same things. Like you can just see all of this happening in real time. But you do something, you're like, all right, that wasn't right. So let me try it again. I'm going to make this ever so slight adjustments. That's what's going on with the cerebellum as well. Okay. Okay. We're going to not talk about sympathetic and parasympathetic right now. We'll save that for when we get into the cardiovascular system. Okay. Okay. So